Hello, this is Max again. Pardon the background, it's nothing fancy. I don't have the equipment or anything. I was going to make this video a continuation of the last one, but I thought it would be best to give a brief background of my childhood and um, of my life, basically, and all the traumas and unfortunate events that I had to go through. I think that would give um, a more full picture after I start explaining the aftermath of the hospital for special surgery. So I'll reserve that the aftermath to part 3 or 4, and I'll use this to discuss my past essentially. Um, so without further ado, so first a little brief history. My father's side of the family. Um, it's really interesting. Like he traveled along with this really important Chinese leader. His last name is Ma Bufang, or Ma Bufan to those who know. He was one of the ones that were responsible for the. I don't, you don't know much about politics or history, but he was one of the ones that were responsible for the revolution between China and Taiwan and how Taiwan formed as a result. Anyways, my dad traveled with Ma Bufan. He's not related to him, but he's just one of the families that traveled with him and was really close to him. So I think they left Taiwan. He was Muslim. They were both Muslim. The Mabufan family and my dad's side, they were all Muslim. So they traveled to Egypt first, but they stayed there for a few years. But they decided to go to Saudi Arabia because that's where Mecca is, and the capital of Islam and whatnot. So that's where my dad ended up with his mom. So his mom was born in China, but um, she had my dad in Saudi Arabia, I believe. Uh, so my dad was already born in Saudi Arabia. My mom, she was from Taiwan, or she is from Taiwan. She traveled to Saudi Arabia to work as a nurse because, according to her, they were paying. I mean, the salary package was appealing back at that time. Of course, all of what I'm saying is what they told me. So at this point, I'm doubting a lot of what they're telling me. I think it's all like made up stuff. I think everything in my life was made up and put together. But for the sake of this video, I'm just gonna mention what transpired and what I was told and what happened, instead of trying to get deeper into it. But at this point, if you ask me, I really feel that everything was made up. Anyways, so I was obvious. So my mom, when she went to work as a nurse, um, she met my dad there in the hospital. He was like what, like about 6, 7 years younger than her. She was like about 25 when she had me, and my dad was like 19. So they get married, and I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. Uh, so let me start by introducing some of the vivid things that I remember that really put a dent on my life. Because obviously I can't really talk about everything that happened in my life. It would be too long and too much and unnecessary. So I'm just gonna mention a few of the stuff that I feel that are significant. So my mom and dad divorced eventually, but while they were still married, I remember them dropping me off at this handyman's house. It's like we lived in an apartment building, a 3-floor apartment building with 9 units. And the way apartment buildings were in Saudi Arabia is that each apartment building would have this little kind of like a room or smaller apartment with its own bathroom where a handyman would reside. And so, first of all, The apartment that I grew up in was my grandmother's apartment. So my father's mother, and there's these two other elder ladies about the same age as my grandmother. They all traveled together um, when they went to Egypt first and then went to Saudi Arabia. So my grandmother lived in one apartment, and on the adjacent apartment lived the other two elder. I used to call them all grandmas, so the other two elder ladies that are not technically not related to me. So, anyways, my dad and mom lived with my dad's mom in that apartment. The reason I'm bringing this up is because you'll see later, as I start mentioning things, it'll kind of click in and make sense. So, anyways, they would drop me off at this handyman's apartment every single day, and I never questioned it as a kid, but as I started growing up, like I was thinking, why? Like, it's not like my dad wasn't home or my grandma wasn't there to take care of me. Why would they drop me off? Especially me being only 3.5 or 4 years old, it just didn't make sense. So they would drop me off over there, and I remember him making me this cheese baguette, cheese and fruit jam every morning. Eventually, he started essaying me, basically. Sexual assault, if I can mention that on YouTube, I don't know. I wouldn't obviously go into detail, but he did stuff to me that no kid should endure at all. And I remember crying to my parents at some point, but either they didn't get the hint or they just didn't care. Or maybe this whole thing was a part of their plan. So they kept dropping me off and keep continuously getting essayed, and I think that's what kind of made me a homosexual for the rest of my life. That is until last year when I became officially a Christian. So it's not that I'm not attracted to males, but I stay away from intercourse, period, or fornication, masturbation, all that. I left that out. But anyways, that was this. I'm assuming that was the reason why I had gay tendencies because of what happened over there, and part of the reason why I'm attracted to older men because I was obviously 3.5 at the time, and that guy was like easily in his mid 20s, if not 30. Um, so that was one thing that left a mark. Later on, as I remember my dad and mom arguing a lot. They kept fighting, yelling at each other, fighting, whatnot. I found out later, obviously, that they about the reason why they kept arguing. But as a kid, I never knew. I just observed that they kept continuously argued and fought and all that, yelled at each other. So at some point, my mom moved out of the house. She went to live in this dormitory. It's like a little little compound where nurses live. Because according to her, my dad wouldn't want to drop her to the hospital. He's kind of getting lazy and whatnot. So she went there and lived. So I would only see her once a week, if not twice at most. And I stayed on my dad's side of the family. And yeah, the thing with the handyman continued on and on. So where do I go from there? Eventually, well, not eventually, I would say at some point, my dad left the country. He went to the Philippines because my mom paid for his education. She paid for him to study university over there. So I've been separated from my dad for years. I would say like 2 years or maybe more. I believe I was 5 or 6 at most. I think it was more closer to 5 when my dad returned from the Philippines. Of course, yeah, when he left, my mom was still living in her dormitory thing, and I was with my dad's mom in her apartment because she was the one. My grandma was the one that was taking care of me. My mom couldn't take care of me because she worked. So as I was living there, my dad comes back one day with this other woman and a kid. Apparently, he got married and he had a kid over there who was like about a year and a half or so. So he comes back and he goes with that girl, with that wife, I mean, it's his new kid. They go into the bedroom where he used to sleep with my mom, and I remember him buying me this little fish tank with a goldfish in it, and I was so excited over the fish, I left everything out. Like I didn't even understand what was going on. I was just excited to see him and happy about the fish aquarium that he got me. So, I think it was the same day or the day after, my mom called just to talk to me. And I started getting excited and mentioning, "Oh, my dad's back and he brought me this fish." She was like surprised, like she was shocked. She started talking to my grandma on the phone. Well, not my grandma, but one of the two other elder ladies I was telling you about. And he starts arguing with them. Like, she was like, I heard yelling on the phone, and she's like, "How could he be back and not mention anything to me?" And blah, 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 blah. And so forth, so on, and then eventually hang up. Later that day, I remember her coming to the apartment, and I opened the door, and she was like, "Where's your dad?" And before I could mention anything, one of the elders from the other adjacent apartment comes out, and she was like, "Hey, hey, come in, come in!" And she pulls my mom into the other apartment, and then they start telling her that, "Oh, he's not back. Your son is probably like had your son probably had a dream or was confused or something." But she was like, "Okay, if he's not back, then I might as well just go and check. I want to see if there's something in my room." And I remember that elder lady was trying to like pull my mom back, and she wouldn't have it. She was starting to get even more and more suspicious. So I was there just in the middle of the war. I remember going after my mom when she rushed into the bedroom, and she started banging on the door because the door was locked, and my dad wouldn't answer. He was like, no one would answer, but obviously someone was in there because you can hear the air conditioner, and the lights were off, and the doors were locked. So she starts banging and banging, and I remember this extremely vividly. So I think his wife opens the door, and I remember her just jumping on her, and they start scratching each other, hitting each other, like having their way with each other. And my dad was just lying in the bed, like nothing was up. And the little girl, which is my stepsister, she was crying her eyes out. I was crying my eye out. I was looking at them, freaked out, and that left a scar in me. Um, those are some of the events that are really extremely prominent, but it's nothing compared to the other horrible stuff that happened throughout my childhood. Which is what makes me think that everything that I lived through was orchestrated. Um, so, anyways, my after all that fight, a lot of things happened, and my dad eventually divorced. Well, my mom divorced my dad, and she was gonna leave to the United States because that's where her brothers and her family were. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, why didn't she go to the U.S.? Didn't they have good like salary packages back then in the U.S.? But that's another topic. Anyways, um, she leaves to the United States, and I remember as a kid, I went outside to the yard and I was like crying my eyes out. I was literally like looking up at the sky and crying, crying because my grandma told me that, oh, she she had to go after she left already. I don't think she ever said goodbye to me, or I really don't remember her ever consoling me or telling me that she's leaving and this is going to be her last day or anything. It just happened. And when that happened, I just went outside and sat by the stairs and started crying my eyes out. I remember it super vividly. I remember every detail of it. And from there, I don't remember much like details until I started school. So throughout the school years, I was living with my um, grandmother from my dad's side. Uh, my dad wasn't home also because he left to this other city to work. He left his wife uh, with my grandmother, and he went to this other city to work. So I was living with my grandmother for the most part. And I started school, elementary school. I was one of the more awkward kids at school. Like I wouldn't talk. Um, People would bully me. People would belittle me. Um, I remember it was because of this first day that I went. Some kid gave me a piece of Starburst, and I wasn't supposed to eat during class, so I ate anyways. I opened it and I started eating, and the teacher kind of slapped me or slapped my hand. And ever since, I just felt embarrassed or shocked or whatever. I stopped talking to people. I stopped interacting socially with kids. They all started bullying me anyways because I was the only East Asian looking kid in the whole school. It was a local Arabic school. So everyone started like bullying me. Some of the teachers made fun of me. Um, Even though I was a nerd, that's all that I remember. I remember I was extremely smart. I would be like at the top of my class. But it wasn't really about understanding, it was more about memorizing stuff. I really didn't care about any of the school over there. Uh, so I was living with my grandma for the most part. Uh, I was abused as a kid a lot, like physically abused. I remember if I kind of threw a tantrum about school or if I didn't want to go to school, my grandma would beat me up. And I'm not talking about like a slap on the wrist. She would curse me out and use a stick to hit me, slap me around, and all that. I remember if if it if I kind of got stubborn and still continued with my tantrums and antics, she would call my uncle, just my dad's brother, my dad's older brother. And boy, oh boy, uh, he was extremely rough with me. Like, let's one of the events. I'm not, obviously it's hard to mention everything, but one of the instances, he just I locked myself in the room because I didn't want to go to school. He would like kick the door open. Um, he held me and threw me against the wall. I was like 6 or 7 at most. He would throw me against the wall, beat me, and give me like punches, like like serious, like it's like he was punching someone his age. He would punch my head so hard that I would hear ringing in my ears, and sometimes my head would swell up. Like at this stage, I'm thinking like I'm lucky that I didn't get a concussion or I didn't get like internal bleeding or anything like that. I'm lucky for that. Uh, yeah, basically I was being rough handled, as you would say. Um, my dad eventually started divorced that other lady, and he would remarry, re-divorce, remarry, re-divorce. It was like a game to him. And my mom would call every like once every like couple of months, 3 months. She would call once just to say how's your school, how's everything, and that's it. And that was my relationship with my parents. My mom didn't really seem interested in me. My dad clearly wasn't interested in me. He was more like a brother figure, but then that not even that because I don't see him as much. And my relationship with my dad wasn't the greatest because I felt like he was a perpetual. What do you call those people that continuously lie? They lie like he lies like nonstop about the most minor stuff or major stuff. It doesn't matter. He would have to make something up, and because of that, I just felt distance from him. Like I would talk to him and everything, but I just didn't admire him. Like as the only family that I considered kind of family was my grandmother because she was the only one that raised me. She made me food. She Um, she took care of me essentially. She was literally my only family. My mom I wasn't close to. My dad I didn't look up to, and my uncle I feared for my life because of him, but I didn't really care about him or like him. So as I grew older, I remember my mom started calling back and she's asking me to apply for a green card to come to the United States, and she was so insistent on it. Um, I remember traveling to the United States for the first time when I was 13 or so, but I didn't want to stay because I was too homesick and I was kind of worried about the schools over there and the language barrier and all that. So I didn't want to I didn't want to stay. So I went back to Saudi Arabia. It wasn't until I was about 17 that I went back to the States, and that time I stayed. I let me go back to when I traveled to the States for the first time when I met my mom. So she seemed like she was happy to see me, but she didn't act like. At that point, I've been absent for her for like what for like at least 8 years or 9 years. So I was more excited about seeing her than she was me. Like she didn't hug me. She she did hug me, but it wasn't like that kind of affection. It was just like, oh, long time no see. How are you? And she kept telling me, oh, your grandma made you fat. Your grandma made you really big. You should eat less and all that stuff. She took me to Disney and all that, and that was about it. At age 17, when I went back to the States, that's when I stayed. I stayed. I finished my high school and later my university years and all that. But anyways, throughout my interaction with my mom, she was always off. Like she was extremely mean. She kept mocking me, telling me I look too fat, and when I get skinny, you look too skinny. I was never good enough. Like she asked me to do these chores, and when I do them, she's never happy about them. Like she would tell me, "Well, you should have done that too. You should have done this too." And whenever I get good grades in school, I would tell her, "Hey, I got a good grade." She was like, "Well, that's because I forced you to study, or you could do better." You know, the way she kept talking, she kept looking down on me. But I always kept making up these excuses in my head. I was like, "Oh, she loves me, but maybe that's just how she is. That's her personality." Or maybe I'm being a little too sensitive. I'm being a little extra. I kept blaming everything on myself, and that's the same way with all my friends that I met in Saudi Arabia. Like they would take advantage of me, borrow money and not return, borrow games and not return. Or later, as I started working in Saudi Arabia, I would invite them over for dinner. I would buy the stuff, and they would take it for granted. They would never invite me back, or at least maybe once in a blue moon, even though they earned more than me, or at least similar to what I earned. I just never thought much of it. I really didn't hold them accountable or anything. It's just something that I started realizing more as things started unfolding after the events at the hospital for special surgery. Um, I had a couple of friends in the United States, but my interactions with them were also very limited. My life was just, I lived, I would say I was a loner most of my life. Like, I had a couple of good friends that I thought were good, but they weren't. They took advantage of me just like all the rest. In my college years, I met this person that seemed like he was nice, but he kept. I found out later that he didn't really have any friends except for me, and he kept telling me stories about how he rejected people who asked him for to be his friends and whatnot. But I was like, what makes me special? Like, why me? But anyways, eventually that person left me, as I'll mention later, hopefully in part three. Uh, Yeah, so most of my life I was a loner, neglected by my family, not just my mom and dad, but my family in general, or abused or treated like garbage, essentially. Um, my mother, as I said, was like, she never appreciated anything I did. She kept mocking me, kept belittling me, kept looking down on me. Uh, I remember in college, I started having this extreme episode of OCD. And I would tell my mom, and she would just call me crazy, and you don't have anything, there's nothing wrong with you. I had to look up the diagnosis myself. Like, I kept typing in repetitive thoughts, uncontrollable repetitive thoughts, and eventually I found out that it was OCD. And I started getting seizures and all that. She didn't really seem like she was concerned that much. Like, when I told her about my OCD, she would just call me crazy, as I've said. Uh, she took me to a hospital a bunch of times to do like brain scans and whatnot. But aside from that, she didn't really seem like she cared much. Like, she wouldn't talk to me about my situation, and when I start complaining about it, she would just say like, "What do you want me to do about it?" Stuff like that, you know. Um, so after I finished my university, after I graduated university, I went back to Saudi Arabia to visit my family there. I was hoping to just stay in the country for like a couple of months and then come back to the States to work. But then over there, my dad finds me a job, and I end up staying for 5 to 6 years, or if not more. No, way more. I think it was like more closer to 8 or 9 years. And throughout that time, I was living with my grandma and the two elderly. I hardly interacted with my dad. I mean, of course I talked to him and all that, but he wasn't there. Like, he wasn't really there. Um, my mom, I talked to her every once in a while. I was living independently at that point, but um, eventually I lost my job in Saudi Arabia due to some uh, politics. So, like, the country stopped hiring foreigners, and they had to kick out a lot of the foreigners to hire more local Saudis. So I was let go, and I eventually had to come back to the States. That's where my story with HSS begins. When I first arrived, I was desperate for companionship because um, I was really lonely. So I met this guy and kind of hung out with him, and eventually I moved out and decided to live with him, which was one of the biggest mistakes. My mom was like trying to convince me not to go. She was like, "Why would you want to live alone? You think it's easy? You think life's easy? Blah blah blah." She was trying to guilt trip me, but I just wanted to go anyways. And so I left. By the way, my mom was living with her husband, whom I was introduced to since I was 12. I just forgot to mention that. He encouraged me to go out. He was like, "Yeah, you should move out. You should just depend on yourself and whatnot." So I was like, "Yeah." So I moved out, and I lived with that roommate. I rented this place in Manhattan, and then the rent went up, so we moved from there to Brooklyn, Bay Ridge, to that three-story house where we lived on the third floor. And back then, I was already working with the Hospital for Special Surgery for about a couple of years, 3 years. I know this my story's all over the place, but this is the best I can do within a 30 minute frame video. You know, I don't want to drag it too much. Um, there's nothing supernatural about this part. I just wanted to mention it just to kind of set the path for the next part. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and give a like.